On my 75th birthday, my daughter Eliza looked me in the eyes and said the words that shattered my world. "You are the worst thing that ever happened to my life." As my friends sat frozen around the half-eaten cake, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for over 30 years. I gave her the letter her birth mother wrote the night she abandoned her on my doorstep. The letter that contained not just the truth about where she came from, but a confession to a murder that changed both our lives forever. What Eliza never knew was that I chose to raise the daughter of the woman who killed my own brother. I chose to protect her from a truth so dark it might destroy her. I chose to be hated by the one person I loved most in this world, if that's what it took to keep her safe. But when secrets spanning 3 decades finally come to light, can love survive the revelation of a crime that binds us together in ways neither of us could have imagined? If you've ever wondered how far you would go to protect someone you love, this story will break your heart and then piece it back together. Follow our channel for more emotional, true stories that will change how you see family, forgiveness, and the sacrifices we make for those we love. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from and if you've ever had to choose between truth and protection. I never imagined that at 75 years old, I'd be sitting in my living room watching my whole world fall apart with a half-lit birthday candle still flickering in front of me. It was supposed to be a quiet celebration. Just me, a few friends from church, and the daughter I'd given everything for. The house smelled of vanilla cake. Martha from next door had baked it special, knowing how much I loved it. The walls of my modest home in Savannah were decorated with old photographs, most of them showing Eliza growing up. Her first steps on our creaky porch, her high school graduation, the day she got accepted to college, the proudest day of my life. I remember checking my watch every few minutes as we waited. Pastor Mike kept saying, "She'll be here, Thomas. Traffic on I-16 is terrible this time of day." But I knew better. Eliza was never late unless she wanted to be. It was her way of making a statement. When the doorbell finally rang at 7:42 p.m., my heart leapt. Even after all these years, all the arguments, all her accusations, I still felt that surge of love whenever she walked into a room. Some things a father's heart just can't unlearn. But I should have known something was wrong the moment she stepped through that door. Her eyes were hard, unfocused. She didn't have a gift, didn't even have her purse with her, just her car keys dangling from her finger. The flowered dress she wore seemed out of place with the storm brewing on her face. "Eliza, honey," I said, rising from my seat with arms outstretched. "We were just about to start without you." The room went quiet. Mrs. Abernathy, who'd taught Eliza Sunday school when she was little, smiled awkwardly. Pastor Mike's wife suddenly became very interested in her slice of cake. Eliza stood there, her body rigid as a fence post. There was something different about her, something cold and determined that sent a chill down my spine. "Dad," she said, the word coming out like something bitter she needed to spit out. I lowered my arms slowly, feeling every one of my 75 years in the creaking of my joints. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" That's when it happened. She took 3 steps forward, positioning herself between me and the rest of my guests. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a winter wind. "You are the worst thing that ever happened to my life." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt the blood drain from my face, pooling somewhere around my feet. The room froze. Mrs. Abernathy gasped. Pastor Mike cleared his throat. Martha stared down at her hands. "Eliza," I whispered, but no other words would come. "You lied to me my entire life," she continued, her voice trembling now. "You made me think I was someone I'm not. You kept me from knowing who I really am." I could see tears forming in her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry, full of decades of questions I'd never answered. Something inside me broke in that moment. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the weight of the secret I'd carried for over 30 years. Or maybe it was just the realization that I couldn't protect her anymore. Not from the truth, not from the pain, not from anything. Without a word, I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of cotton as I walked past her to the old oak cabinet in the corner of the living room. I could feel everyone watching me as I pulled open the bottom drawer and reached all the way to the back. My fingers found what they were looking for, an envelope yellowed with age, sealed with a dab of wax that had long since cracked. I'd promised myself I'd never open it, never share it. But promises, like hearts, are sometimes made to be broken. Walking back to Eliza, I held out the envelope. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely keep it steady. "Liza," I said, using the nickname she hadn't let me call her since she was 12. "Read this when you're alone." Your mother wrote it the day she left you with me." Her eyes widened slightly. For just a moment I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. She took the envelope, her fingers barely brushing mine. "What is this?" she whispered. "The truth," I said simply. "All of it." What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't tell her in front of everyone, was that the letter in her hands contained not just the story of her birth, but the confession of a crime that had bound me to her forever, a crime that had forced me to raise the daughter of the woman who had murdered my own brother. As Eliza turned and walked out, letter in hand, I knew our lives would never be the same again. Some truths are like bullets. Once fired, you can never take them back. The morning after my birthday disaster, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the untouched cake still sitting on the counter. The candles had melted into odd shapes like question marks mocking me from their waxy graves. I hadn't slept. How could I? For 34 years I'd carried a secret heavier than any man should bear, and now it was out there in the world, clutched in Eliza's hands. No, not my daughter, not really, though my heart has never known the difference. The truth is, I never planned on being anyone's father. After my wife Sarah died of breast cancer in '87, I figured that chapter of my life was closed. We'd tried for children for 7 years, but God had other plans. I was 41, running a struggling flower shop downtown, and living in a house that felt too big and too quiet. My days had a simple rhythm. Wake up, water the orchids, open the shop, close the shop, come home to silence, repeat. Until that rainy night in November 1990. I remember every detail. It was just past midnight. The weather forecast had predicted thunderstorms, and boy did they deliver. Rain came down like Judgment Day, lightning cracking the sky every few minutes. I was awake because the storm had knocked out my power, and I was fumbling around for candles when I heard it, a pounding at my front door so desperate it sent a chill through me. When I opened it, my sister Lorraine stood there soaked to the bone. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face, and her blue eyes, so like my own, were wild with something I couldn't name. Fear? Madness? Both? "Tom," she gasped, and that's when I noticed the blood. It was everywhere, on her hands, her clothes, even speckling her face like some horrible rouge, and in her arms, wrapped in a dirty yellow blanket, was a bundle that moved. "Jesus Christ, Lorraine," I whispered, pulling her inside. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She didn't answer my questions, just thrust the bundle toward me. "Take her," she said. "You take her now." I hesitated, and she shoved the bundle into my chest. The blanket fell away slightly, and I saw her, Eliza, 10 months old, with eyes as dark as midnight and a tiny rosebud mouth. She wasn't crying, just staring up at me with a solemnity no baby should possess. "Lorraine, tell me what's going on," I demanded, awkwardly holding the child. I'd never been comfortable with babies. Sarah had always said I held them like sacks of flour. My sister backed toward the door, her hand moving to her waistband. That's when I saw the knife tucked into her jeans. The blade was dark with something that wasn't rust. "I'm not coming back," she said, her voice oddly calm now. "Take care of her. She's innocent in all this." "In all what?" "Lorraine, stop." I tried to grab her arm while balancing the baby, but she jerked away. "He deserved it," she whispered. "After what he did to me for years. You never saw it, Tom. You never wanted to see it." A horrible understanding began to dawn on me. "Where's Richard?" I asked, referring to my younger brother, her husband of 5 years. She just looked at me, and in that moment I knew. My brother was dead, and my sister had killed him. Before I could stop her, she disappeared back into the storm, leaving me holding a baby that didn't belong to me. A baby whose father was my dead brother. A baby whose mother was now a murderer. I didn't call the police that night. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I cleaned Eliza up, fashioned a makeshift diaper from a tea towel, and fed her warm milk from a teaspoon because I had no bottles. She didn't cry once, just watched me with those solemn eyes, as if she understood everything. The next day, I learned that Richard had been found stabbed to death in their little house across town. Lorraine was picked up 3 days later at a bus station in Atlanta, still wearing the bloody clothes. She didn't resist arrest. She didn't ask about her daughter. I went to the courthouse the following week, filled out more paperwork than I'd ever seen in my life, answered questions from social workers, police officers, and judges. I had no experience with children. I was a single man with a failing business. By all logic, I should have been the last person to get custody of Eliza. But sometimes, life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you never knew you needed. I sold my truck to pay for a lawyer, took out a second mortgage on my house, borrowed money from friends at church, and 6 months later, Eliza was legally mine. Not by blood, but by choice, by love. I never told her the truth. How could I? How do you tell a child that her mother murdered her father, my brother, and then abandoned her on a stormy night? So I created a kinder story. I told her that her parents had died in an accident, that I was her uncle who loved her like a father. It wasn't entirely a lie. What Eliza never knew, until now, was that her mother had written that letter the day before she was arrested. She'd mailed it to me with no return address. Inside was a confession, an explanation, and a plea. A plea that I keep Eliza safe from the truth. For 34 years I honored that request. Even when Eliza began to hate me for my silence. Even when she accused me of hiding her past from her. Even when her eyes, so like her mother's, looked at me with suspicion instead of love. Now, as I sat in my empty kitchen on the morning after my 75th birthday, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by finally giving her that letter. Because the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just gives you new chains to wear. I've spent 3 days now wondering if Eliza has read the letter. 3 days of sitting by the phone that never rings, watching reruns of Matlock to fill the silence and remembering the weight of that envelope when I handed it to her. That damn letter. For 34 years, it sat in my drawer like a ticking bomb. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I could hear it whispering from inside the oak cabinet, calling me a coward, daring me to open it and face what was inside. But I never did. Not even once. I honored Lorraine's desperate plea. Never read it. Just give it to her when she's ready to know everything. I lied about that part earlier. I did know what was in the letter. Not the exact words, but the gist of it. Because Lorraine had told me, in her own way, on the one and only time I visited her in prison. It was 1992, about 18 months after that rainy night. The Women's Correctional Facility in Alto, Georgia, was a 5-hour drive from Savannah. I remember the journey feeling both too long and too short. What do you say to your sister who murdered your brother? How do you look her in the eye knowing she orphaned a child you were now raising as your own? The visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and cheap coffee. Lorraine looked older than her 34 years when they brought her in. Her once bright blonde hair now dull and cropped short, her blue eyes sunken into dark hollows. She didn't smile when she saw me, just sat down across the plastic table and folded her hands, revealing forearms covered in crude prison tattoos. "How is she?" Those were her first words. No hello, no thank you for coming. Just those 3 words, spoken in a voice that sounded like it had forgotten how to be used. "She's good," I said, pulling out the wallet-sized photo I'd brought. "She's walking now, talking a little bit. She says, 'Dada,' when she sees me." Lorraine stared at the photo but didn't touch it. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not quite love, but something close to it. Regret, maybe. "You didn't open it," she said. Not a question. "No." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. But you should know what's in it, Tom. You deserve that much." And then she told me. Not word for word, but enough that I understood the horror of what that folded motel stationery contained. The letter was written on cheap paper from the Palms Motel off I-95, where she'd stayed the night after what she did to Richard. The ink was blue, the handwriting frantic and slanted, like it had been written by someone whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. There were stains on it, coffee, maybe, or blood. I never looked close enough to tell. "I killed her father," Lorraine had said across that prison table, her voice flat. "I stabbed him 7 times while he slept. I wrote in the letter why I did it. All the things he did to me over the years. The beatings that you never saw because he was careful to hit where clothes would cover. The time he held my head underwater in our bathtub until I passed out because dinner was cold. The way he'd lock me in the hall closet for hours when he went out drinking. I remember feeling sick. The fluorescent lights of the visiting room suddenly too bright. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I could have helped you. You didn't have to. He was your baby brother." She cut me off. "Your golden boy. Would you have believed me over him?" The truth in her question stung like a slap. Richard had always been the family favorite. Charming, handsome, successful. The high school quarterback who went on to become a respected insurance agent while I struggled to keep my little flower shop afloat. Would I have believed Lorraine? I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure. There's more in the letter, Lorraine continued, leaning forward. I wrote about the baby, about why I left her with you. Because you were going to prison, I said. She shook her head slowly. Because every time I looked at her, I saw him. I saw his eyes, his smile. It made me think things no mother should think about her baby. A cold dread crept up my spine. What kind of things, Lorraine? She didn't answer directly. Just said, in the letter, I asked Eliza for forgiveness. Not for killing him. I'll never be sorry for that. But for not being strong enough to separate him from her in my mind. For not being able to love her the way a mother should. We sat in silence after that. What could I say? Eventually, a guard announced that visiting hours were ending. As they led her away, Lorraine turned back. There's one more thing in that letter, Tom. Something I need her to know someday. Her eyes locked with mine. I wrote that even though I couldn't raise her. Even though I couldn't look at her without seeing him. I loved her. I still do. And I wrote that the best thing I ever did for her was leaving her with you. That was the last time I saw my sister. She died in prison 3 years later. Lung cancer that spread to her brain. They said it was quick at the end. I hope that's true. And now, all these years later, Eliza finally has the letter. The truth written in her mother's own hand. The confession. The explanation. The plea for understanding that Lorraine never had the courage to make in person. I wonder if she can smell the past on that paper the way I always could. That strange mix of cheap motel soap, fear, and something else I could never quite identify. Something that smelled like the end of one life and the reluctant beginning of another. What I didn't tell Eliza when I handed her that envelope was that giving her the truth wasn't an act of courage. It was surrender. Because sometimes keeping a secret is harder than revealing it. Sometimes love means carrying the weight alone for as long as you can, until your back finally breaks under the burden. The call came 6 weeks after Lorraine's arrest. I was at the flower shop, arranging a sympathy bouquet for Mrs. Hathaway's funeral. White lilies and baby's breath, simple and dignified, just like the old schoolteacher had been. The bell above the door hadn't rung all morning, and the radio was playing Patsy Cline's Crazy softly in the background. I remember that detail so clearly because of how the song seemed to mock my situation. Is this Thomas Calloway? The voice on the phone was crisp, professional, with that particular cadence that educated northern men often use when speaking to southern folks like me. Slightly too slow, as if they're worried we won't understand big words if they talk at a normal pace. Yes, this is Tom, I answered, cradling the receiver between my ear and shoulder as I wrapped green floral tape around the stems. My name is Howard Schiller. I'm representing your sister, Lorraine Calloway, in her upcoming trial. My fingers stilled on the flowers. In the week since that rainy night, I'd thrown myself into caring for Eliza, learning through trial and error how to change diapers, make formula, and soothe a baby who sometimes woke screaming in the night. Whether from normal baby troubles or some subconscious memory of what she'd witnessed, I'll never know. Mr. Calloway, are you there? Yes, I managed. What can I do for you, Mr. Schiller? I'll be direct. Your sister has requested that I contact you regarding the child. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Was Lorraine changing her mind? Did she want Eliza back? The thought sent a spike of panic through me that was as surprising as it was intense. In just 6 weeks, that solemn-eyed little girl had become my whole world. What about her? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lorraine wants to be clear about her wishes, he said. She does not want parole. She does not want a reduced sentence. She has instructed me to plead guilty to second-degree murder. I frowned, confused. I don't understand. Why would she do that? Richard, what happened was complicated. I couldn't bring myself to say that my brother had abused her. Not out loud. Even knowing what I knew, it felt like a betrayal. She has her reasons, Schiller replied, his voice softening slightly. But what she wanted me to communicate to you specifically concerns her daughter. Lorraine insists that the child never know who she is, never know what happened. She wants you to raise her as your own, with no connection to her or to Richard. I sank onto the wooden stool behind the counter, the half-finished bouquet forgotten. That's a lot to ask. There's more, Schiller continued. She wants to sign away all parental rights, make the adoption permanent and irrevocable. She also mentioned a letter she left with you. My free hand instinctively moved to my chest pocket, where I'd been carrying the envelope since that night. I hadn't put it away yet. couldn't bear to let it out of my sight, though I honored her request not to open it. "What about it?" I asked. "She wants you to keep it sealed until the girl is old enough to understand everything." Her words were, "when she hates him enough to need to know why." I didn't have to ask who him was. Me. Lorraine knew somehow that a day would come when Eliza would resent me, the man who kept her mother's secrets, who raised her on half-truths and comfortable lies. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really." "There's one more thing," Schiller said, hesitation creeping into his professional tone. "Lorraine asked me to tell you something personal." She said, "Tell Tom I'm sorry I couldn't be the sister he deserved, and tell him that sometimes the kindest lies are the ones we tell to protect those we love." After I hung up, I sat in the empty shop for a long time, surrounded by flowers meant for a dead woman, thinking about kindness and lies and protection. 3 days later, I made a decision that would alter the course of our lives forever. I sold my flower shop, the business I'd built from nothing after coming home from Vietnam with shrapnel in my leg and nightmares in my head. Old Mr. Finley from the bank shook his head when I brought in the paperwork. "Tom, this place is all you've got," he said, peering at me over reading glasses that sat halfway down his nose. "You sure about this?" I wasn't sure about anything except that Eliza needed me to be more than a failing small business owner with a limp and a dead wife. "I'm sure," I told him. Next went my 1987 Ford F-150, the blue one with the dent in the passenger door from where Sarah had backed into a fire hydrant the week after we bought it. She'd cried so hard over that dent, and I'd held her and laughed and said it gave the truck character. Letting it go felt like losing another piece of her. Finally, I cashed in my life insurance policy, the one I'd faithfully paid into for 20 years, thinking it would someday help Sarah if anything happened to me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now using it for a child neither of us had ever planned on having. All told, I scraped together just enough to pay Howard Schiller's retainer fee. When I handed him the check, my hands shaking slightly from the magnitude of what I was doing, he looked genuinely surprised. "Mr. Calloway, this isn't necessary. The state will provide your sister with a public defender." "No," I said firmly. "Lorraine deserves better than some overworked court appointee who'll spend 20 minutes on her case. She deserves someone who'll make sure she's treated fairly." What I didn't say was that I wasn't doing it for Lorraine. I was doing it for Eliza. Someday she would learn the truth about her mother, and when that day came, I wanted her to know that her mother had been represented with dignity, that justice, however complicated, had been served properly. Schiller studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your sister said you were a good man." I see she was right. The irony of it all? As Eliza grew, she developed a fascination with the mother she'd never known. She created an image in her mind, pieced together from the careful half-truths I fed her and her own desperate imagination, of a beautiful, kind woman who had died too young. A woman who would have made butterfly-shaped pancakes on Saturday mornings and braided her hair for school. A woman nothing like the broken, vengeful sister I'd last seen across a prison visiting table. And I let her believe it. God help me, I encouraged it. Because Lorraine had been right about one thing. Sometimes the kindest lies are the ones we tell to protect those we love. But what I've learned in my 75 years is that even the kindest lies eventually demand their payment, with interest. Raising a teenage girl as a single father is like trying to defuse a bomb with nothing but a paperclip and a prayer. One wrong move and the whole thing explodes in your face. By the time Eliza turned 13, I'd learned this lesson the hard way. It started with small things, the kinds of questions most parents probably expect. But for me, each innocent inquiry felt like walking through a minefield. "Dad, what was Mom's favorite color?" she asked one evening as I helped her with homework at our kitchen table. The same table where Lorraine and I had eaten Sunday dinners as kids, where my brother Richard had announced his engagement, where I now sat trapped in a web of lies I'd been spinning for years. "Blue," I said without thinking, "like the ocean on a clear day." It wasn't a complete lie. Lorraine had loved blue. But the mother Eliza was asking about didn't exist. This idealized woman I'd created from scraps of truth and generous fiction. Did she like to read? Is that why I like books so much? Another landmine. I nodded, swallowing hard. She always had her nose in a novel, just like you. In reality, I'd never seen Lorraine read anything more substantial than a fashion magazine. The love of reading was something Eliza had picked up from me, from our nightly ritual of bedtime stories that continued long after most kids outgrow them. As she grew older, The questions became more pointed, more difficult to navigate. "Why don't I have any pictures of her?" Eliza demanded one day when she was 15, standing in my bedroom doorway with her arms crossed. She'd hit a growth spurt that summer, and suddenly the little girl I could scoop up with one arm was nearly eye level with me, all gangly limbs and fierce eyes. "There was a fire," I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. "Before you were born. Lost all our photo albums." "That's convenient," she muttered, but she seemed to accept it. For a while. By 16, Eliza had become a collector of questions I couldn't answer. She kept them in a journal I once glimpsed open on her desk, pages and pages of neat handwriting, documenting the inconsistencies in my stories, the gaps in her history, the vague non-answers I gave when pressed too hard. She began to pull away from me, spending more time with friends whose parents let them stay out past curfew, wear makeup, date boys. I tried to be reasonable, God knows I did, but fear made me stricter than I meant to be. Fear that she'd end up like Lorraine, vulnerable and damaged. Fear that she'd somehow inherit the rage that had driven my sister to murder. Irrational fears, perhaps, but they kept me awake at night nonetheless. When Eliza was 17, she found the newspaper clipping. I'd kept it all these years, tucked between the pages of my Bible, not out of some morbid fascination, but as a reminder of why I'd made the choices I had. The headline was stark. "Local insurance agent found dead, wife sought for questioning." There was a photo of Richard, his confident smile frozen in time, and a smaller photo of Lorraine from happier days. I came home from the hardware store to find Eliza sitting on the couch, the yellowed clipping in her trembling hands. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. "The woman. She looks like me." My heart stuttered in my chest. "Just people I knew a long time ago," I said, reaching for the clipping. "Where did you find this?" She pulled it away from my grasp. "In your Bible. The one you read every night, the one you keep by your bed." Her eyes narrowed. "Is she related to me? Is that why you kept this?" "Eliza, please," I began, but she was already standing, already moving toward the door. "I'm going to Ashley's," she said flatly. "Don't wait up." She stayed at her friend's house for 3 days. When she finally came home, we made an unspoken agreement never to mention the clipping again. But something had changed between us, a fracture in the foundation of trust I'd spent 17 years building. After that, the accusations began, small at first, then growing like weeds after a summer rain. I was controlling. I was keeping her from living her life. I was hiding things about her past, about her mother. I was the reason we lived in a shabby house with outdated furniture while her friends had new cars and vacations to Disney World. What could I say? That I'd sold everything I had to pay for her mother's legal defense? That every spare penny went into a college fund so she could have opportunities neither Lorraine nor I ever did? That I worked 2 jobs, replacing the flower shop with a position at the local hardware store during the day and night security at the mall, just to keep our heads above water? No, I said nothing. I took each accusation like a blow I deserved, because in a way, I did. The life Eliza resented was built on a foundation of necessary lies. When she was 19 and home from her first year at the community college, the only schooling we could afford despite that carefully tended college fund, she met Jared Montgomery. He was 24, worked at his father's car dealership, and drove a Mustang that cost more than our house. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, and he looked at Eliza like she was water in the desert. I didn't like him from the start. There was something calculating in his eyes when he looked around our modest home, something almost predatory in the way he put his arm around Eliza's waist. But she glowed when he was near, laughed at his jokes, and looked at him with the kind of adoration I'd once hoped she'd direct at me. It didn't take long for Jared to figure out the rift between us. He had a talent for finding weaknesses and exploiting them, the kind of talent that makes for successful salesmen and terrible human beings. He began to feed her suspicions, dropping little comments I wasn't meant to hear but somehow always did. "Your dad could have done better for you if he wanted to. Don't you think it's weird he never talks about your mom's family? There's got to be some inheritance he's keeping from you. No offense, but normal parents don't hide this much from their kids." Each poisonous whisper drove the wedge between us deeper. By the time my 75th birthday rolled around, Eliza and I were barely speaking. She'd moved in with Jared 6 months earlier, against my desperate objections. Our conversations, when we had them, were short and tense, full of things unsaid. So when she showed up at my birthday party, late and angry, I should have been prepared. But nothing could have prepared me for the words she spat at me in front of my friends, for the pain that ripped through my chest like physical wound. You are the worst thing that ever happened to my life. As I handed her Lorraine's letter, as I watched her walk away with the truth clutched in her hand, I wondered if she was right. Maybe the worst thing I'd ever done was love her enough to lie. 2 days before my birthday, I was sitting at the kitchen table reading the morning paper when I heard the distinctive rumble of a sports car pulling into my driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know it was Jared's Mustang. That car announced itself like a peacock strutting through a henhouse. It was unusual for him to come alone. Typically, on the rare occasions when Eliza visited, she acted as a buffer between us, filling the silence with nervous chatter while Jared looked around my home with barely disguised disdain. The sound of his footsteps on my porch, confident, unhurried, sent a ripple of unease through me. When I opened the door, he was leaning against the porch railing, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and flashed that car salesman smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mr. Calloway," he said, straightening up and extending his hand. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." He was dressed like he'd just stepped out of a catalog, pressed khakis, blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up to show his expensive watch, leather loafers without a scuff on them. I was suddenly conscious of my worn flannel shirt with the coffee stain on the cuff and the hole in the knee of my jeans. "Jared," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Eliza's not here." "I know," he said, his smile unwavering. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you, man to man." Something in his tone, a hint of condescension perhaps, made my jaw tighten, but I stepped aside to let him in. My mama raised me with manners, even if I didn't particularly care for the company. "Coffee?" I offered, leading him to the kitchen. "No thanks, this won't take long." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where I'd taught Eliza to write her name, where we'd played endless games of Go Fish on rainy afternoons, where I'd sat alone most nights since she moved out. Jared placed a leather portfolio on the table between us, his manicured fingers resting on top of it. "I'll get right to the point," he said, unzipping the portfolio. "Eliza's pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the rough wood under my fingertips, trying to anchor myself against the sudden dizziness that washed over me. "Pregnant," I repeated, the word feeling strange in my mouth. Jared nodded, watching my reaction with an intensity that seemed almost clinical. "About 10 weeks along. We just found out for sure yesterday." 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. My little girl, not so little anymore, was going to be a mother. I was going to be a grandfather. Why hadn't she come to tell me herself? Was she okay? Was she happy about this? Scared? A mixture of both, like I'd been when Sarah told me she was expecting all those years ago before we lost the baby. Is everything all right?" I finally managed to ask. "She's fine," Jared said dismissively. "Morning sickness, but the doctor says that's normal." He pulled a document from his portfolio and slid it across the table to me. It was several pages of dense legal text with yellow tabs marking spots for signatures. "What is this?" I asked, not reaching for it. "Just a formality, really," Jared replied, his casual tone at odds with the intensity in his eyes. "It's a document waiving any claim you might have regarding custody or visitation rights to our child." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me? It's pretty standard these days," he continued smoothly. "Eliza and I are planning to get married before the baby comes, of course, but we felt it was important to establish clear boundaries regarding family involvement." My hands, gnarled now with arthritis, curled into fists under the table. "Family involvement," I repeated slowly. "You mean me seeing my grandchild?" Jared had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but he pressed on. "Mr. Calloway, let's be honest here. Your relationship with Eliza is complicated. She has a lot of unresolved issues regarding her upbringing." "Unresolved issues that you've been more than happy to encourage," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. His expression hardened slightly. "I've simply supported her right to ask questions about her past, questions you've consistently refused to answer." We sat in tense silence for a moment, the ticking of the old kitchen clock suddenly loud in the quiet room. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, a familiar sound that seemed to belong to another world entirely. A normal world where grandfathers weren't being asked to sign away their rights to grandchildren not yet born. "Did Eliza ask you to bring me this?" I finally asked. nodding toward the document without touching it. Something flickered across Jared's face. Hesitation, perhaps, or guilt. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "We discussed it," he said carefully. "She agrees it's for the best." I looked down at my hands, at the liver spots and blue veins mapping out the story of my 75 years. I thought about all the times I'd used these hands to care for Eliza, to change her diapers, to wipe away tears, to applaud at school plays, to teach her how to plant tomatoes in our little backyard garden. And now this man, this stranger, who'd known her for less than 2 years, was telling me I wasn't fit to be part of her child's life. "No," I said quietly. Jared blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. I stood up slowly, my bad knee protesting the sudden movement. "I'm not signing that, and I'd like you to leave now." He remained seated, his expression hardening. "Mr. Calloway, I don't think you understand the situation. Eliza doesn't want you involved in our child's life. She believes you've done enough damage. Then she can come tell me that herself," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now please, get out of my house." Jared's facade of politeness cracked, revealing the contempt that had been lurking beneath all along. He stood, gathering his papers with quick, angry movements. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice cold. "Eliza's finally seeing you for who you really are. A selfish old man who cares more about his secrets than his own daughter's happiness. You've already done enough harm. Why can't you just step aside gracefully?" His words landed like blows, each one finding the soft, vulnerable places in my heart. But I'd weathered worse storms than Jared Montgomery. "I think you should go now," I repeated, moving to the door and holding it open. As he brushed past me, he paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're the worst thing that ever happened to her, you know. She says it all the time." After he left, I sat back down at the kitchen table, the house suddenly too quiet around me. I opened the drawer where I kept Lorraine's letter and took it out, turning the yellowed envelope over in my hands. For over 30 years, I'd protected Eliza from the truth it contained. I'd carried the burden alone, let her blame me for the secrets and half-truths, accepted her anger as the price for her innocence. But as I sat there in my empty kitchen, the words Jared had spoken echoing in my mind, I wondered if I'd been wrong all along. Perhaps the truth, however painful, was what Eliza needed now, especially with a child of her own on the way. Perhaps it was time she understood the choices I'd made and why I'd made them. That night, I cried for the first time since Sarah died. Quiet, racking sobs that shook my old body as I sat alone with the letter and my memories, wondering how love and lies had become so tangled in my hands. The day after my birthday, I sat on my front porch swing, watching the morning light filter through the oak trees that lined our street. Mrs. Abernathy had called twice already, leaving concerned messages about how I was doing after that unfortunate scene at my party. I let the calls go to voicemail. What could I say? That my heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest? That I hadn't slept all night, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by giving Eliza that letter? I kept replaying the moment in my mind. The shock on her face, the way her fingers had trembled slightly as she took the envelope from my hands. What was she thinking now? Had she read it? Was she devastated? Angry? Relieved to finally know the truth? For 2 days, the silence was absolute. No calls, no texts, no Eliza appearing at my door demanding explanations. Just silence, stretching between us like a canyon too wide to cross. On the 3rd day, Mabel Jenkins from next door came over with a casserole and news. Mabel had been my neighbor for 27 years, and though her tendency to gossip sometimes grated on me, her heart was good. She'd watched Eliza grow up, had been a surrogate grandmother of sorts after Sarah died. "Tom," she said, setting the casserole on my kitchen counter, her voice gentler than usual, "I thought you should know. Eliza's car has been parked outside her apartment for 2 days straight, lights on at all hours. Nobody coming or going." I put down the coffee mug I'd been washing. "You've been watching her place?" Mabel shrugged, unapologetic. "My sister lives in that complex. Unit right across from Eliza's. Says she's worried. That boyfriend of hers came by yesterday, kept knocking, but she wouldn't let him in. He was yelling up a storm before security asked him to leave." My hands tightened around the dish towel. "Did your sister hear anything else? Is Eliza okay?" "Can't say for sure," Mabel replied, her eyes soft with concern. "But Susan said she could hear crying sometimes, through the walls." I closed my eyes briefly. feeling the weight of Lorraine's truth pressing down on Eliza now, just as it had pressed on me all these years. I'd given her the letter hoping it would help her understand, but what if it only caused more pain? "Thank you for telling me," I said, setting the towel down. "I should go check on her." Mabel put a weathered hand on my arm. "Give her time, Tom. Some truths take a while to settle in the heart." I nodded, knowing she was right, though every fiber of my being wanted to go to Eliza, to hold her like I did when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. But she wasn't that little girl anymore, and I wasn't sure she'd welcome my comfort now. On the morning of the fourth day, my phone rang. Eliza's name flashed on the screen, and my heart leapt to my throat. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad." Just one word, spoken in a voice so hollow and exhausted it was barely recognizable as hers. "Can we talk?" "Not on the phone." "Of course, sweetheart. I can come to you or—" "No," she interrupted. "Let's meet at Forsyth Park, by the fountain, in an hour." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then slowly got up to get ready. As I dressed, my hands shook so badly I could barely button my shirt. What would I say to her? How could I possibly explain choices made in the desperate confusion of that night 34 years ago? Forsyth Park was busy for a weekday morning. Young mothers pushing strollers, tourists taking photos of the famous fountain, locals walking their dogs along the shaded paths. I arrived early and found a bench with a clear view of the fountain, my bad knee grateful for the rest after the walk from where I'd parked. I spotted Eliza before she saw me. She was coming from the north entrance, walking slowly, her shoulders hunched as if carrying a physical burden. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater despite the Georgia heat, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Even from a distance, I could see the dark circles under her eyes. When she reached the bench, she didn't sit immediately, just stood there looking down at me, her face unreadable. I wanted to stand, to hug her, but something in her posture warned me to stay put. "You read it," I said. Not a question. She nodded once, then finally sat, leaving a careful space between us. Her hands were clutched tightly in her lap, knuckles white. "I read it," she confirmed, her voice slightly stronger than it had been on the phone. 3 times. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the water cascade from the tiered fountain. It was the same fountain where I'd taken her for ice cream countless Sunday afternoons, where she'd thrown pennies and made wishes as a child. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked, still not looking at me. "All these years, why keep it secret?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "At first it was because you were too young to understand. Then as you got older I was afraid of what it would do to you, knowing where you came from, what happened, and then what?" She pressed when I faltered. "And then it had been a secret for so long that I didn't know how to untell it," I admitted. "I was afraid you'd hate me for lying, for keeping you from knowing your real mother." Eliza made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. "My real mother," she repeated bitterly. "The woman who stabbed my father to death while he slept, who couldn't bear to look at me because I reminded her of him." I flinched at the raw pain in her voice. "Lorraine was damaged, Eliza. What your father, what Richard did to her for years." "I know what he did," she cut me off. She described it in detail, every beating, every humiliation. Her voice cracked slightly. "She wrote that the night she killed him, he had threatened to start hurting me too once I was old enough to learn how to behave. That's when she snapped." I closed my eyes briefly. That particular horror new even to me. Lorraine had never mentioned that part during our prison visit. "What I don't understand," Eliza continued, finally turning to look at me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, "is why you took me in. I wasn't your responsibility. I was the child of the woman who killed your brother." The question hit me like a physical blow. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? That moment on my porch when Lorraine had thrust a bundled baby into my arms, a moment that had changed everything. "When your mother handed you to me that night," I said slowly, "you looked up at me with these solemn eyes like you could see right into my soul. And in that moment, you weren't Richard's daughter or Lorraine's daughter. You were just a baby who needed someone, and I was just a man with empty arms and an empty house." I paused, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "Taking you in wasn't a burden, Eliza. It was the most selfish thing I've ever done. Because from that first night, you gave my life purpose again. After Sarah died, I was just existing, going through the motions. But you made me live again." She was quiet for a long time, absorbing my words. A light breeze stirred the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees around us, creating shifting patterns of sunlight on the pathway. "In the letter," she finally said, her voice so soft I had to lean closer to hear, "she wrote something else. She said that leaving me with you was the one good thing she did in her life, that you would love me better than she ever could." I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing my throat. "She was right about that," Eliza whispered, then almost to herself, "Now I understand why you always trembled when you talked about her." I reached out hesitantly, covering her clenched hands with my weathered one. To my surprise, she didn't pull away. "All these years," she said, "I've been so angry with you, for keeping secrets, for not giving me what other kids had, for being so careful with me all the time." She looked up at me, something breaking in her gaze. "But you were just trying to protect me from this, from knowing that I came from that." "You didn't come from that," I said firmly. "You came from love. My love for you. Everything else is just circumstances." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly. "I need time," she said, standing abruptly, "to process all this, to figure out what it means for me, for the baby." I stood too, my heart leaping at her mention of the pregnancy. "You're keeping it? The baby?" A flicker of something, perhaps the ghost of a smile, crossed her face. "Yeah, I am." As she turned to leave, I called after her, unable to help myself. "Eliza, are you okay?" She paused, looking back at me over her shoulder. "No," she said honestly, "but I think maybe someday I will be." I watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller as she followed the path back toward the park entrance. The distance between us felt both vast and somehow smaller than it had been in years. Time has a funny way of healing wounds. Not completely, not without leaving scars, but enough that you can touch the tender spots without feeling like you might die from the pain. It's been 3 years since I handed Eliza that letter. 3 years since she stood in my living room and told me I was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. 3 years. And here I sit on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple that even my old florist's eyes struggle to name. The evening air is thick with humidity, typical for a Savannah summer, and my iced tea glass sweats almost as much as I do. 78 years old now, and my body reminds me of its age with every creak and twinge. But my mind is at peace in a way it hasn't been for decades. Beside me on the wicker table sits a stack of envelopes. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, the occasional handwritten letter. All from Eliza. All bearing postmarks from Asheville, North Carolina, where she moved 2 years ago. The handwriting on the envelopes is slanted and fluid, so similar to Lorraine's that sometimes it catches me off guard, makes my heart stutter for just a moment before settling back into its rhythm. After our meeting in Forsyth Park, Eliza and I entered a delicate new phase of our relationship. She didn't come back home, didn't call every day, didn't act as if nothing had happened. Instead, she took the time she needed to process everything. The truth about her parents, the lies I'd told to protect her, the realization that the identity she'd constructed for herself was built on a foundation of carefully curated half-truths. She broke up with Jared a week after reading the letter. I don't know exactly what happened between them. Eliza hasn't shared all the details, but I gather it was ugly. Mabel's sister reported hearing shouting from Eliza's apartment, followed by the sound of things breaking. The next day, Jared was seen removing his belongings while Eliza stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face set like stone. "He wanted me to get rid of the baby," she told me later, during one of our cautious phone conversations. Said he didn't want to be tied to me or my crazy family history for the rest of his life. I remember gripping the phone so hard my arthritic knuckles ached, fighting back the urge to hunt down Jared Montgomery and show him what an old man with nothing left to lose was capable of. But Eliza didn't need my anger then. She needed my support. "What will you do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. There was a long pause before she answered, her voice stronger than I expected. "I'm keeping my baby, and I'm moving away from Savannah. I need a fresh start." I understood. How could I not? Sometimes the ghosts of the past are too thick in the air to allow for healing. Sometimes you need new horizons, new faces, new streets that don't hold memories around every corner. She chose Asheville, a city nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, known for its artistic community and progressive atmosphere. A place where a single mother with a complicated past could blend in, could reinvent herself without the weight of local gossip and family history pressing down on her shoulders. She found a job at a small bookstore, rented a modest apartment near a park, and prepared to welcome her child into the world. I sent money, not that she asked for it, but it eased my conscience to know I was helping in some small way. She accepted it without comment, which I took as a good sign. When little Sarah was born, named after my late wife, a gesture that brought tears to my eyes when Eliza told me, I drove the 5 hours to Asheville, my old Buick protesting the mountain roads. I sat in the hospital waiting room, uncertain of my welcome until a nurse came to get me. She's asking for you, the woman said, leading me to a room where Eliza lay, exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Dad, she said, looking up at me, her face soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. Come meet your granddaughter. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering against my ribs. When Eliza placed that tiny wrinkled baby in my arms, I felt a circle closing, life continuing despite all our human efforts to complicate it, to break it, to deny its persistent, stubborn beauty. Sarah Thomas, Eliza said quietly, for your wife, and for you. I looked down at the sleeping infant, then back at my daughter. Because no matter the blood, no matter the history, that's what she is and always will be. Thank you, I whispered, unable to say more. That visit marked the beginning of our healing. Not a return to what we had been, that was impossible, but the creation of something new, something perhaps more honest, and therefore more valuable. Eliza didn't move back to Savannah. I didn't ask her to. We found a rhythm of occasional visits, regular phone calls, and those cards and letters that now sit beside me on the porch. The most recent letter arrived yesterday. Inside was a photograph of Sarah, now 2.5, sitting on a swing, her chubby legs kicking at the air, her smile wide and uninhibited. On the back, in Eliza's handwriting, she asks about her grandpa Tom every day, planning a visit next month if that's okay. Love, E. Love. Such a simple word to write, such a complicated thing to live. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the clouds in final blazes of gold and pink, I think about the lessons life has taught me in my 78 years. I've learned that sometimes the kindest acts look cruel from certain angles, that secrets can protect and destroy in equal measure, that forgiveness doesn't always come in grand gestures but in small steps forward, in letters postmarked from distant cities, in photographs of smiling children who bear your name. I've learned that being a father, a real father, has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Every day you choose to love. Every day you choose to stay. Every day you choose to bear whatever burden necessary to keep your child safe, even if that burden is their hatred. I was once told that love is a verb, not a feeling. I didn't understand that fully until Eliza stood in my living room on my 75th birthday and tore my heart out with her words. Because even in that moment of ultimate rejection, I loved her. I loved her enough to finally give her the truth she needed, even knowing it might cost me her presence in my life forever. As darkness settles over my little backyard, I gather up Eliza's letters and head inside, moving slowly with the careful deliberation of old age. I place them in the drawer of my bedside table, next to the one letter I'll never send, the one I wrote to Lorraine after she died, telling her about the amazing woman her daughter had become. I may not be a hero in anyone's story. I made mistakes. I kept secrets. I protected a murderer. I raised a child who wasn't mine by blood. And yes, I was hated by her on my own birthday, in front of people who had known us both for years. But if regret has a face, it isn't mine reflected in the mirror every morning. Because I know now what I only suspected then. Loving someone sometimes means being willing to be hated by them, if that's what it takes to protect them from a greater pain. And if love is measured not in grand gestures but in daily choices, in quiet sacrifices, in the willingness to bear whatever comes for the sake of another's well-being, then perhaps I've loved well after all. The end. As Thomas's story comes to a close, I find myself wondering what I would have done in his shoes. Would I have had the courage to raise a child born from such tragedy? Would I have carried the burden of those secrets for decades, knowing they might someday cost me the very relationship I was trying to protect? Sometimes the most profound acts of love don't look like love at all. They look like silence, like sacrifice, like allowing yourself to be misunderstood for the sake of someone else's peace. The truth is, we all carry letters we haven't delivered yet. Unspoken words, untold stories, parts of ourselves we keep hidden to protect those we care about. Thomas waited until his 75th birthday to share his truth with Eliza. What truths are you waiting to share? What burdens are you carrying alone? Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Thomas's journey is that even when the truth arrives decades late, wrapped in pain and misunderstanding, it still holds the power to heal what has been broken. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful human stories to light. Leave a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were Thomas, or if you've ever had to choose between a painful truth and a comforting lie. Remember, every family has its secrets, but it's how we face them that defines who we truly are.